I want to start by thanking Arlene and everybody at GSPI, not just for the invitation, but for enabling my science to be more meaningful and to affect change. So today, my talk is Science and Communication for Change, and you can see some examples of me trying to communicate for change. I want to preface my remarks by saying that, as I mentioned, I'm in Canada, and we have a very different ecosystem. And let me see if I can just advance my slide. There we go. So I see communication as working very much in an ecosystem. And again, I want to emphasize that I'm speaking about a Canadian ecosystem, which I really see as very different from US system. And it's not just the US, but also state to state. So to me, the ecosystem, as Arlene and Catherine have said, start with the public, and that's a matter of influencing the public. So change can come in two ways. The public can change their purchasing habits as consumers, and which is important because I think, as Arlene said, it allows for very rapid, immediate change. But it's not always equitable change, because not all consumers have the same income and have the same options. That's where structural change comes in. And structural change comes as a matter of changing societal expectations through regulation, legislation, and policy. So that's when the public's ideas and pressure are brought to bear on politicians who notice. It's first the political operatives who work in the ministers' offices and so on, who see what the public is saying, and then they will animate the conversation that goes to, I should use my pointer here. So from public to politicians, who will then work with the government, and here I mean both government, scientists, and policymakers in government. Sometimes they'll have their legislation, they'll be able to draft legislation and make changes directly, or they can grease the wheels to allow funds to flow to scientist practitioners who then can fill the gaps. But scientist practitioners also make the news. So it's incumbent upon scientist practitioners, such as myself, to identify new issues, bring them to the fore, so to make sure that the public sees them. And here we have to work with media, except often we're not the best at working with media. So we work with Endgo, such as Green Science Policy, who are expert at engaging with the media in order to bring these issues to the attention of the public. Then there's also the role of a scientist as a commentator. So once you've done enough science and you've had some media stories and a little bit of public profile, you can build a relationship with media who will then come to you for comment. And this is really important because scientist as commentator, it's not just commenting about the issue that they ask about. I don't stop there. As you can tell, I probably talk a lot. What I try to do is to educate the journalists. I give the backstory. I say, look at the connections here. And I say, well, wait a minute, there's another story. And then what I've done by cultivating these relationships with media is that I'm able to pitch stories and say, and you know, it's not just my research that I'm pitching, but I want to pitch the research of those in the scientific community and say, you guys should be looking at this. These are the up and coming stories. I'm going to use 5 examples to illustrate this ecosystem. And my one take-home message is that it takes all these different avenues. It's not a single way. And Catherine, you said that very well. So the first one starts, actually, I've been doing science for a while, working on flame retardants. Media came to me, we worked with them. It was for public education. I have to say in Canada, we're very polite, we're very nice. We have a nice government, but we actually don't do much in terms of policy. We are not policy leaders. We are serious followers here. So, okay, so the Canadian Broadcast Corporation, the CBC, came to me in, I think it was 2014, sort of did a short piece, auditioned me, came back the next year and said, okay, we want to do a whole story on flame retardants. So they engaged us. We had a lot of discussion with the producers. This is a TV show called Marketplace, which is like an expose for consumers. So we worked with the producers to get the science right, get the script. We did the science. We did the theatrics of walking into a home with our XRF devices to look at bromine in different parts of the home. We analyzed it. We talked about it. Here we are just posing with the grad students who did this. It was a lot of work. It was a fantastic experience. And the episode is on YouTube if you want to see it. They did a dynamite job. So then the CBC has been in touch with me in Marketplace in particular. So they came back to me about a year later. And this is a really great success story. And I know Arlene likes this one. So they said, Miriam, pitch a story to us. I said, well, so we worked together and I said, what about toxic jewelry? Like this is really something in the fore. And the Canadian legislation for kids' jewelry and for all jewelry is poor. It's deficient. So they said, yeah, we did this a couple of years ago. Actually, there was lead poisoning, like somebody had lead poisoning from jewelry. So we worked with the producers again. We did the product screening for them. We did the TV shoots. They came up with a fantastic episode. And in the episode, they did this great interview with a government official. And it was just frankly embarrassing. And they also did 2 exposés with 2 retailers, Ardennes and Aldo. The next year, they came back and said, let's look at what's happened. And what happened as a result of that Marketplace episode is that, first of all, Ardennes, who literally threw out the camera crew in the 2016 expose, Ardennes finally changed their tune and pulled the toxic jewelry from their shelves. And the government changed its policies. Not far enough, but at least it changed the policies. Wow, like that was just incredibly gratifying to be able to be part of that in both pitching the story, working with the journalists, getting the science right, being the talking head, and affecting change. So the third example comes with Arlene, who engaged us. So here we start with the Endgo, Arlene, with Green Science Policy, saying, here's a science gap. What can we do to fill that gap? And then getting it into the media. So just last month, and Catherine's on this, because Catherine was instrumental in going on this ride. And it was great to work together. We put together just a short opinion piece to draw attention to the lack of information about polymeric flame retardants in building insulation. We didn't have much science to go on, but that's the story. Hey, there's tremendous amount of production of this chemical with hardly any science. Like that is just unacceptable. That's what the piece was about. And it grew, it garnered reasonable media attention. And I think stay tuned because I think we have our work cut out for ourselves. So we got to keep going on that one. So I've mentioned, I've been a commentator. I've been invited now to do many interviews, both of, we've pitched our research. I showed you one, but we actually had a number of great papers this year, very policy relevant, very newsworthy. We've done press releases. We've talked to a variety of press, but also, and I think my career is just about done on this one, but I've done a lot of live shoots, live interviews, live radio, live TV, press, talking to the press about everything from stupid stuff about towing icebergs from Antarctica to the Middle East for clean water. But I had to do that in order to keep it sort of, that the media would keep calling me so that I could talk about what I thought were more meaningful stories about climate change. And they called on me as well during a federal election to be a commentator, on the policies. So here's one where an Endgo, actually, it was environmental defense in Toronto, in Canada, approached me and said, Miriam, would you be involved in heading up a letter to press for change for the Canadian Environmental Protection Act? So we headed up a letter. I was one of the talking heads, and you can see here that as a talking head, I tried to make it very personal and very immediate, which the journalists really grabbed onto and liked. This was the Minister of the Environment, Catherine McKenna, who was pressed into responding to the scientist's letter. The example I'm going to talk about are PCBs, polychlorinated biphenyls. It's pretty crazy that we're still talking about them since production stopped over 50 years ago, but we are. The reason why we're talking about them is because the Great Lakes, where I'm situated, still have fish consumption advisories because of high PCB levels. Over 75% of the fish in the lower Great Lakes cannot be consumed because of PCB levels. So here's the example. The government agency with which we work very closely facilitated our work in PCBs, but it actually started before that because I had a graduate student who was privy to the inventory of PCBs. We took it, published it, showing locations of PCBs in Toronto. So we have a history with PCBs. But more recently, the government agency came to us and said, we would like to look at the destruction of PCBs and see how we've done with our inventory, because we're signatories, because Canada's signatory to the Stockholm Convention. And this map actually shows the signatories to the Stockholm Convention and different levels of compliance with getting rid of PCBs by the signatories. Okay, so the government came to us as science practitioners to start with this inventory. And then we expanded it. We thought, oh, this is really interesting. Let's go and discuss this with our colleagues at NRDC in the US, because the US is not a signatory to the Stockholm Convention. PCBs can still be lawfully used in the US, and maybe the US is the source of the PCB that are filling the Great Lakes fish so that both sides of the border can't eat them. So we're working with NRDC right now. When we get this finished and published, I'm sure that NRDC will take this to the media. The effect will hopefully be to get public concern, which will then animate the politicians, maybe on the US side of the border, to affect change with PCB regulations. To conclude then, science can prompt change in many different ways using this ecosystem. It's important that, we're all drawn together because we do policy relevant research, but it's very important to remember that not all the research is going to be newsworthy, but by doing the research, it helps you gain credibility as an expert. It's important to cultivate your network because you never know where the change can happen and who may actually be better at getting the change to happen. It's important to understand your ecosystem because change can be affected in so many different ways. This is the ecosystem with which I work in. And I just want to close by saying it's sometimes very scary to be a science commentator when you talk out of your zone of expertise. But just remember that science, being a science commentator, is really important. We do our science at the behest of the public, the politicians, and the government. That's where our funding comes from. We have to keep science we have to continue to keep science in the limelight. And by doing so, it enables all science and environmental science and good science to be done with our partners in the ecosystem. Thanks very much.